Hi, this is Jules. A quick caveat for this video. I am not a therapist. I am just sharing patterns I've noticed and techniques that have worked well for me because my inner guidance is telling me to. So, normal ways of dealing with emotions are often not that great. Option one is just letting the emotions take you over. This can successfully process and release the emotion, which can feel quite good in the moment, but it can also have very unpleasant consequences for your life as you say and do things that you might regret later. Option two is suppressing your emotions. This does avoid unpleasant consequences in the short term, but it's not sustainable. Since you're not processing the emotions and releasing them, they're still there under the surface. They are liable to eventually burst out anyway at inopportune times and force you into option one. Or if you happen to have an iron will and are successful at suppressing your emotions long term, they'll start having other unpleasant side effects like causing you physical pain and illness. But there is an option three: properly process and release your emotions. Not only is option three generally better for your health and your life, there are other benefits as well. As I mentioned in the Introduction to Yourselves video, emotions carry messages from your subconscious. Hearing the messages your subconscious is sending you earns the trust of your subconscious, which helps you in being able to work with your subconscious for other purposes. And these messages can be very useful in their own right for adjusting your self-care, identifying shadow work that needs doing, and progressing your consciousness. The key difference between option two and option three is that you're actually processing and releasing the emotions. So they're truly gone. They don't come back and bite you in the ass later. The key difference between option one and option three is that you process the emotions first before taking action in response to the messages they contain. There can be layers to the emotions you're experiencing. Processing the layers one by one allows you to see underneath the surface layers to get to deeper messages, which might be more important. And clearing layers of emotions removes noise. It clears the channel so you can think more clearly and hear your inner guidance more clearly. When you're in the grip of a negative emotion, your sympathetic nervous system is active. This is what causes the fight, flight, or freeze response. It reacts quickly, but it reduces your mental capacity to be smart and creative. It also makes it very difficult to hear your inner guidance. So decisions made in this state often aren't the best decisions. On the other hand, once you have processed and released your negative emotions, your parasympathetic nervous system is able to take over again. This is what's called the rest and digest state. You feel calm. You have free access to your higher intellect and creativity, and it is much easier to hear your inner guidance. Definitely a better space from which to make lucid decisions about how to respond to the message from your subconscious. Here's the general formula for option three. First, clear the channel. Step one, recognize the immediate emotion you're having right now. Just recognize that you're having an emotion. Step two, welcome it. Step three, process it. In other words, fully experience it. Step four, release it. Then repeat steps 1 through 4 with subsequent layers of emotion until the channel feels clear. One way you can tell that you've successfully cleared the channel is the change in how you feel. As you shift from fight, flight, or freeze mode to rest and digest mode, your body will naturally relax. You'll feel like everything is all right, or even good. There's often this natural little sigh that happens, and or you might find yourself naturally smiling or even laughing. Another way you can tell that you've successfully cleared the channel is what comes through it. You might notice that you're suddenly seeing possibilities and solutions that you weren't seeing before, which indicates that you now have access to your higher mental functions. Or you might notice that you're suddenly able to hear your inner guidance more clearly. Once the channel is clear, note any messages you received from the emotions and check in with your inner guidance. If instructed by inner guidance to do something, do it. This could be, for example, some immediate self-care, asking for help, setting a boundary, doing something you've been avoiding, doing some deeper shadow work, or making a life change. You can do this process with positive emotions too, not just negative ones. As you peel away layers of negative emotions, you might find that there are positive emotions underneath. You can stop there if you want to, but you don't have to. You can continue doing cycles on the positive emotions. Negative emotions, by their nature, are subtractive energy. When you properly process a negative emotion, it usually dissolves and fizzles out. Positive emotions, by their nature, are additive energy. When you use these steps to process a positive emotion, it can expand and become more intense. When you're processing positive emotions, the channel is already clear, so you're not waiting for the channel to be clear before stopping. You can just go through as many cycles as you want to until you get to the degree of positive emotional state you want to be in. In fact, if you want to, you can just keep going until you end up having a mystical experience. If you're doing spiritual autolysis, though, you'll most likely want to focus on negative emotions. Spiritual autolysis is about dissolving layers of the self, so the subtractive nature of negative emotions can be very helpful for this. However, if you're using this process for spiritual autolysis, one thing that can happen is that the negative emotions start expanding and becoming more intense. That's because you're getting closer and closer to the truth. In the case of spiritual autolysis, that's a good thing. Keep going. Now I'm going to give a little more detail about how to do steps 1 through 4. Step 1, recognizing your current emotion. Recognize the most surface level, immediate emotion you're having right now. It can be big or very, very subtle or anything in between. This is simple awareness or mindfulness. This step often happens automatically, but not always. You don't have to name the emotion or figure out what's causing it. I sometimes find naming helpful. Other times it can get in the way. And even if I do name the emotion, I can discover in step 3 that I was wrong about what the emotion really was. All you really need to do in step 1 is recognize that you're having an emotion. This may sound ridiculously simple, but it's an important step that can't be skipped. When you're not realizing that you're having an emotion, you're either identifying with it and it's controlling you and the reality you perceive, or you're automatically already suppressing it. Recognizing that you're having an emotion puts you back in the driver's seat. Step 2, welcoming. Welcoming is the opposite of resisting. You first need to stop resisting the emotion because what you resist persists. If you're resisting the emotion, it will stubbornly stay. If you're having trouble letting go of the resistance to the emotion, then first apply the formula to the resistance itself. Recognize it, welcome it, process it, release it. If you're having trouble letting go of the resistance to the resistance, then apply the formula to the resistance to the resistance. You can take this as far up the recursion tree as you need to. In my experience, when I do this, at some point my brain breaks and all the layers of resistance fall away. Or another way to explain this step is that nothing leaves before it is first loved. Welcoming is far more than just tolerating or accepting. Welcoming an emotion means fully embracing it and appreciating it. It's a message, and it is here to teach you something important. Sometimes with an emotion that I'm having particular difficulty embracing, I'll think of it in more aggressive terms. If this emotion is going to make me suffer, then damn it, I'm going to squeeze all the juice out of it that I can. Bring it on. That kind of thing. Steps 3 and 4, processing and releasing. Step 3, processing. Processing is really about fully experiencing the emotion. This can give you insights about which emotion this really is, what is actually triggering it, what it is trying to tell you, and or how holding on to it is negatively impacting you. All of that information can be very helpful. But it's the experiencing of the emotion, the processing itself, that's really the point. Emotions are energy. When you don't process them, the energy builds up, blocking your energy flow, blocking access to your higher mental functions and your higher self, and causing physical problems like pain and illness. I'll describe a few specific methods of processing emotions in a moment, but first I want to talk a little bit about step 4, releasing. Often, releasing happens automatically after or even in the middle of processing. If it doesn't, you can examine what you experienced in step 3 and ask yourself one or more questions about it, like, what am I getting out of holding on to this emotion? This is a legitimate question. Often there's a very good reason for the attachment. What would be the consequences of holding on to this emotion forever? Get real with yourself. Be honest. Is it hypothetically possible to let go of this emotion? Am I willing to let go of it? When? If the emotion still isn't releasing, go through another cycle. Pay close attention in step 1 to the most surface level, immediate emotion. It might not be the emotion you thought. If it's resistance or apathy, go ahead and go through a cycle specifically on that. Then, once you've gotten through all the surface level stuff and get down to the emotion you really want to work on, this can deepen the experience, allowing you to see and experience more, which can then allow you to properly release. In general, every time you repeat the cycle, do it with whatever is the most immediate surface level emotion. Each time through the cycle, the emotion might shift to a different one, so you need to check in and see which emotion you're actually dealing with in each round. And it might be surprising which emotion is underneath the one that just got released. It's not always logical. It doesn't work to do this process on the emotion that you think should be there. It only works when you work on the emotion that's actually there, whether that emotion makes sense or not. If you try a few cycles and you find that nothing is changing and you're not making any headway in your emotional state, don't keep butting your head against the wall. Leave it alone for a while and try again later. Sometimes you just need some time. And if you've been trying this for a few days and you're consistently not making headway, then if I were in your shoes, I would start looking for a good therapist to help me get unstuck. Okay, so here are a few methods of processing that have worked well for me. Number 1 is diving into and through the fantasy. This technique can work well if the emotion comes with a lot of thoughts or images or a story. Just let whatever thoughts or images or story are there come up. Then turn up the volume and play out the tape all the way to the end. Dive into it deeper and deeper until you break out the other side. Fair warning, this technique can be very effective, but it is a bit risky. It can be very emotionally intense, sometimes surprisingly so. And there is a possibility of re-traumatizing yourself, especially if you pull out midway through. The key with this technique is to go all the way through. It takes courage to plunge all the way through like that, but if you do, it can be very healing. And number 2 is a technique that is safer. It's somatic experiencing. With this technique, you don't focus on thoughts or story or any meaning to the emotion at all. Instead, you focus purely on the experience of the emotion itself. You ask and answer questions for yourself like, where do I feel this emotion in my body? What size is it? What shape is it? Is it heavy or light? Dense or diffuse? Transparent or opaque? Does it have a color, a texture, a temperature? Does it have clearly delineated edges, or are they fuzzy? Etc. Any questions that come to mind. As you closely examine the feeling like this, you might notice that it changes. If it does, you just keep updating your description, like, okay, now it's turning more pink and it's rising and getting smaller and more diffuse, or whatever. And then enough practice and experience with basic techniques like those can unlock some seriously cool, more advanced techniques. For example, I've found that I can now just open my chest and let emotions flow through me and out. Negative emotions dissipate, positive emotions expand. All the layers of emotion just go through very rapidly. I still experience the emotions as they go through me, so sometimes this can feel pretty intense, but it all happens in just a matter of seconds. I've also found that if I stay present, it's possible to just keep my chest open like that and let emotions flow through as they arise. This is an excellent way of keeping the channel clear. It doesn't let me see the emotions in high focus like the other methods do. It's too fast for me to consciously register the messages. Most of the time, this doesn't matter because I now have the ability to very clearly hear my inner guidance, and that guides all of my decisions, so it will tell me if I need to make changes for self-care, etc. But I do sometimes still use the more basic techniques if, for example, I want to do shadow work. All right, so a bit about therapists. You can absolutely process emotions by yourself, but if you're feeling nervous about it or if you need some help, then finding a therapist who's a good fit for you can be very helpful, especially in the beginning as you're learning how to access and work with your subconscious. They can help create a safe space for you to process your emotions. They can introduce you to new techniques for processing your emotions and help train you in them. They can help you navigate processing big emotions in a way that doesn't just re-traumatize you. If you do end up going into a particularly intense space, they can help you come back out of it. And depending on the therapist, sometimes they can also help you brainstorm ideas for actions you might want to take in response to the messages you get from your emotions. That said, the finding a good fit part can be challenging, especially if you're already in tier 2 in consciousness progression or in high subtle stage or beyond in spiritual progression. It can be very challenging to find a therapist who can understand what you're dealing with and apply appropriate modalities. Sometimes your only effective option is to do it by yourself. One way I've handled this is to plan my deeper emotional processing with self-care bookending, since deep emotional processing can take an extra something. This works like this. I do intentional self-care beforehand to make sure my energy buffer is nice and full to start with. Then I set up things so that I can give myself really good self-care afterward as needed to recover. This can include post-it notes to remind myself of techniques I can use to help myself come down afterwards if I need help with that. An example technique for this could be to get fully present by using my senses in pleasant ways, touching pleasant textures, listening to music I like, etc. There is no problem in the present moment, so getting present is an excellent way to come down. And then, once everything is set up, I do my emotional processing in a safe space where I won't be disturbed. And as implied by what I just described, it can take some time to fully process an emotion, especially a big one, and especially at first. Smaller emotions can be processed faster. With practice, it gets easier and faster even for bigger emotions. Practicing regularly with smaller, low stakes emotions helps a lot with getting better and faster at processing bigger, high stakes emotions. The more you practice, the easier and faster it gets with both big and small emotions. You can even make it a daily practice. Emotional hygiene, like dental hygiene. Keeping that channel clear so you can hear your inner guidance clearly. You can also just run through a quick emotional processing prior to any time you want to access your inner guidance, have full access to your higher mental faculties, do energy healing, etc. If you're interested in learning more about emotional processing, the best existing framework I've found so far is the Sedona method. It's pretty straightforward and complete, and they seem to really understand that techniques like this can be truly transformational if taken far enough. I'll include a link in the description below to the book, but there are online resources and workshops too. It's a whole thing. Until next time, happy experimenting.